What's going on, everyone? Bethesda has dropped a new video called Constellation Questions, talking Starfield with Todd Howard, and in this video, Jess Finster talks to Todd Howard about some common Starfield questions. Now let's talk about these Constellation Questions. The first question is, what inspired Starfield? And Todd Howard brings up two games. The first is Sundog, an 80s space game that was on the Apple II and eventually the Atari ST. He said, one of the first games where you're moving objects around and putting them together, but great game where you had your own ship and you could explore around. So for an 80s game, Sundog really gave players a lot of freedom, and I think that's a big part of the inspiration here. Bethesda is once again looking to push that boundary. The other game he brings up is Traveler. This is a hard sci-fi pen and paper role-playing game, and it is still around. So I'm interpreting this as Bethesda's sort of trying to capture the vision of those games in modern gaming. They're asking themselves, like, if these developers had what we have now, what would these games have been like? And I think that's a really cool vision, and I think Bethesda is going to do a lot with this. Jess Finster then asks, is Starfield considered hard sci-fi? For those who don't know, hard sci-fi is sci-fi in which creators try to stay scientifically accurate. For example, The Martian by Andy Weir is hard sci-fi. The concept is risky when it comes to video games because it forces developers to embrace a lot of realism, and walking the line between a fun sense of realism and things becoming chores can be difficult. Todd Howard first points out the subjectivity of the term, meaning that people often have different definitions of what exactly hard sci-fi is. Then, to give an answer, he said, I think it is more hard to us, and then he talks about how some of Starfield's design details look kind of like real things. Then he says, but it's a trap question because it's a video game, right? So he's being vague here, but he's getting close to acknowledging the line I was just talking about. There is such a thing as too realistic when it comes to video games. He then uses the example of flying a spaceship and says that they made it so you can't just run out of fuel in space because that would be terrible. That wouldn't add anything positive to the player's experience, so why make it possible? Jess Finster's next question was, can you talk more about what players will experience with the traits? Todd Howard responded, each one obviously comes with some sort of negative as well, and we have a way in the game, kind of an activity or quest you can do to remove that trait, as opposed to, I don't like my character, I want to start over. I think this sounds awesome. This way we'll have the charm of the old class systems from games like Morrowind and Oblivion, but we'll have a cure to any sort of hindrance we experience from what we choose. Could be that they're thinking modders will do something like this anyway, so why not beat them to it? Regardless, this is a great balance between the classic mechanics that old school RPG fans love and the modern way of doing things, which is power to the player. One question I have is, will these negative traits each have their own quest or activity to get rid of them? Are some of them mixed? How does that work? Only time will tell. Finster's last question was, we have speech checks and dialogue that reflect your character build. Do you want to expand upon that at all? He responded, we've gone back to kind of I'll call it a classic Bethesda style dialogue with you're looking at the character and how they emote, and you have a series of choices there. Bethesda fans have mixed feelings about dialogue mechanics, which is a future video somewhere down the road. In regards to Starfield, from what's been shown so far, Starfield's dialogue looks like an extremely evolved version of Oblivion's dialogue, which many fans are excited to try. Continuing this thought, he said the scope of the game, the amount of content we're making, is a bit more than we've done before in terms of quests and things like that, but the depth in some of the stuff with dialogue, we just passed 250,000 lines, and that's so a lot of dialogue, but we've gone through it and the impact is really there. So we've known for a while that there's a huge amount of dialogue, so we've wondered, does that mean more quests, more options in quests, or what? It sounds like most of the increase in total lines of dialogue is to add depth. So it's going into things like the persuasion feature, where here we can see that there's a lot of dialogue options. And I'm guessing that there will be more quests that have different routes to completion, like missing an action in Skyrim. Which I think is awesome, because more depth in how the player can approach and complete objectives is a huge enhancement to longevity. Lots of variation in how you can do things means lots of replay value. Bethesda often talks about the story that we tell ourselves when playing their games, and this will make it so we never have to tell the story the same way twice. The last bit of his quote here is, "and that includes my favorite speech persuasion system. It feels like it's part of the dialogue, but you're spending points to persuade them. Feels natural, not like I've entered some other mode where I'm not doing regular dialogue. I'm in this mode of persuading you to get what I want." Here it seems like Todd Howard is clarifying that they're not doing the Oblivion persuasion game again, they just took inspiration from that. This persuasion point system looks very intriguing. I can't tell that much about how it works from what's here, but one question that comes to mind is, where do these points come from? Does the player start each conversation with a certain amount, which is perhaps determined by their character background and traits? Or do players earn these points somehow? My guess is the former. That's it for this video, folks. Please subscribe, like, and share. See you next time.